Hello and welcome to the Meeting Project podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel A. Franz. And as always, thank you for this opportunity to bring a little bit of mental health and meaning to your day. And what a great day today is. This podcast will be released on Labor Day. Labor Day, for those of international flavor, is the holiday in the US that we've been celebrating for about 150 years now, celebrating the laborer, the worker, celebrating their impact on our economy, on our community, and our nation. There's a lot of meaning in other meaning maybe in Labor Day. Labor Day's the unofficial end of summer. At one time, kids would go back to school after Labor Day. Those of you that have children or who teach know that that's changed over the years, and most of you have been back in school for several weeks now. And Labor Day might be a welcome respite from the beginning of the school year. I know in the community where I live, Labor Day weekend is a huge, one of the biggest festivals in the state of Indiana, the world renowned Blueberry Festival, where somewhere around, I don't know, I think the estimates are 500,000 people come through the little town of Plymouth, Indiana. Um, Sometimes I'm a bit curmudgeonly and intentionally avoid it. Other times we go and enjoy the festivities. Still not sure what's going to happen this weekend. I think the girls may be in town and maybe they'll want to go. Labor Day is also the day for many of us where we switch from cold brew coffee in the fridge and start to think of those pumpkin spice lattes. That's right. Many of you I know are already trying the pumpkin spice lattes. But for me, this has been annually every year. I've either written or recorded a bit about labor and work. And ever since my studies in logotherapy, the idea of work has taken on new meaning. As you know, work is one of the largest areas in our lives where we can discover and foster meaning. And Dr. Frankl writes prolifically on that in my favorite, The Doctor and the Soul. There's an entire chapter he dedicates to the meaning of work. And I've spoken quite often on that. I'll speak on it a little bit more later in the podcast. But I was doing some more research, some different reading along the lines of logotherapy. And I was reminded of Dr. Joseph Fabry, Fabry. Fabry, also a Jewish person who was in the concentration camps of World War II. Not the same ones as Frankel. They did not know each other then, but when they both immigrated to the U.S., Fabry emigrated to Berkeley, California, and Dr. Frankel kind of went back and forth to different places as he was lecturing and sharing his message. They met in 1965 and became very good lifelong friends. And Dr. Fabry has written quite prolifically on logotherapy. He actually founded the American Institute for Logotherapy in California, which eventually moved to the Dallas, Texas area, the organization that I'm a part of that hosts the annual World Congress of Logotherapy, not annual, semi-annual World Congress of Logotherapy. So I was skimming through Fabry's book, The Pursuit of Meaning, republished by my good friend, Dr. Charles McLafferty. You can pick this up on Amazon if you like. Fabry really expresses Frankel's ideas in uh, in a more simplified manner, a much more readable manner. A lot of Frankel's work, especially Doctrine of the Soul, is very, very deep. You can see the translation from German to English, but Fabry, I'm messing up that name. Fabry writes in a different style, and I'll share it with you. I'll share a little bit from each. He talks about meaningful activities here, right? And he tells us, although Frankel warned against prescribing meaning, right? Not my job as a therapist to prescribe meaning. Um, but we help patients see three areas where meaning can be found. And you, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know what these are. Our creative activities like work, hobbies, or devotion to a task, our experiences, encounters with works of art, nature, or other human beings, and of course, our attitudes. When in a hopeless situation, we make use of that inner freedom no one can ever take from us, the freedom to take a stand against an unalterable fate, right? So we have our creative opportunities, our experiential opportunities, and our attitudinal opportunities to discover meaning. But this is, I remember reading this paragraph years ago, and it's highlighted here. Um, Fabry writes, today, it becomes increasingly difficult to find meaning in work. Now, if I go back, Fabry wrote this, I don't know, 50, originally published in 1968. So almost 60 years ago, he was talking about the difficulty of finding meaning in work. And I'm not sure, well, I know things have changed. You be the judge. Have they changed for better or for worse? He says fewer and fewer jobs provide meaningful activities. They do not challenge us as human beings, but only provide opportunities to function as part of a machine. Meaning fulfilling work still exists, and in Fabry's mind, for research scientists, physicians, policy making executives, ministers, creative artists, for example. He believes, though, yet holders of routine jobs, factory workers, clerks, sales reps, computer operators, may still see relevance in their work. He goes on to share a story from Frankl. A patient once complained to Dr. Frankl, "It's easy for you, professor. You are a psychiatrist. You can find meaning in your work. But what can I find meaning as mine, as a carpenter?" Frankel's answer was that carpenters who fulfill their task to the limits of their capabilities can find as much meaning as physicians who fulfill their job the best they can, and that the efforts of a clerk can be as meaningful as those of an artist. Frankl believed it wasn't the job that you do, but how you do it that brings meaning, right? That's sorry, here's I already said the highlight. What matters is not the kind of work, but the motivation. Right? It doesn't matter what your job is, it's what you bring to it. The artist whose main goal is to make money with work that remains below his or her best talents will find less meaning than the sales representative who sells a needed item at a fair price. What matters, Frankel told the carpenter, I love this. What matters is not how large the radius of your activities is, but how well you fill the circle. It's not how important, how what the perceived importance of your job is. It's how you go about doing it. He goes on to write, but even with the best of intentions, it sometimes is difficult to find meaning in one's particular work. I know I find that in the area where I practice pretty often. Sometimes darn near abusive work conditions, and a lot of the work I do is helping people to either find the meaning or find a way to find a more meaningful job. He goes on to write, fortunately, with working hours becoming shorter, we have more opportunity to find meaningful activities during leisure hours through things like adult education, volunteer opportunities, community or neighborhood improvement, different work for political parties, or artistic pursuits. However, to be meaningful, such activities have to be the kind that will fill the existential vacuum rather than help us run away from it. Sometimes work is a means to an end. Sometimes it's hard to find meaning in our duties. And I believe, as I've said before, somewhere around the Industrial Revolution, where we started turning human beings into pieces of a machine, a lot of different jobs lost work, or a lot of different work lost meaning. But there are still ways to find meaning in life. It may not be the 8 or 10 hours you put in during the day. If you find that, good for you. You're fortunate, you're blessed, you're lucky, and you probably work hard, right? Because you're trying to find the meaning in that role. You're working intentionally to discover the meaning in that role. But if you can't, if you struggle, it's not always an option to leave the job. Sometimes you have to find meaning in other areas in life after the job, and learning to create, to paint, to draw, to make music, to invest in your community, to find other ways to go out and discover meaning. Now, I believe even In what seems to be the most meaningless situation, meaning can be found by asking yourself, who am I helping? Sometimes it's just the person down the line that you're helping to make an income to support their family. Sometimes you get to work in a situation where you're helping to make something that saves lives or improves lives. Sometimes, though, it really is just about, as Frankl says, adding numbers to the company's bottom line. But there's still an opportunity to find meaning in that. Let's go on and read a little bit more from Fabry. I thought this was really good. He gives a lot of case examples here. I'm not going to go through too many of those, but he does go on to write, changing jobs is not always the solution. Changing jobs may create rather than solve neurogenic conflicts, right? Conflicts of the spirit, conflicts, maybe even family members, right? He says it may create rather than solve neurogenic conflicts in job holders and members of their families. Such conflicts can be brought about by some companies' policies of moving their executives up the ladder, by moving them around the country and even abroad. I did I did work for a large international company whose belief was in order to move up, they had to move people from different, I mean, they had factories all over the world. And if you wanted to move up in this company, you had to move factories. You had to change locations to learn different styles and work with different people. And I know I worked with people that went across the country, nationwide. Um, Much, as the individual employee moved up and made more money, it was incredibly disruptive to the family. And I believe this company sought to move people every 3 or 4 years if they wanted to move up the ladder. And so, as a child of this person, could you imagine being disrupted every 3 or 4 years? It was darn near a military kind of existence, moving and leaving every time. The difference is when you travel, when you move in the military, um, you're given an automatic community, right? If you're on a base, there's an automatic community of people who are doing the same thing. In companies like this, though, you have to create your own community. You have to go out and find community, and that can be hard every 2, 3, 4 years. And that definitely creates some neurogenic conflicts. He goes on to say, let's see, the sales manager of an automobile company who was transferred every few years to a different area suffered a nervous breakdown. Um, an engineer's wife suffered from depression when her husband was made supervisor and transferred to a small company town where she had no friends, and her daughter moved on. There's a lot of examples that he goes through here. He says any job can cause a clash between material and human values. We may have taken on work that was satisfying in our youth, but is no longer challenging. Then we must decide whether to find new ways to fill the circle of our present situation or to make a break for something new with higher challenges. And I think that's, well, if you've listened long enough, that's one of my core beliefs, both personally and professionally. Growth, development, human evolution, individual evolution is about challenging ourselves, pushing ourselves to do different and, well, different, more challenging things so that we can grow. And in fact, I meant to open with this. I got some exciting news today. I'm going to save till the end of the podcast, so stick around and I'll tell you all about it. But we should always be challenging ourselves. And if work isn't a challenge, isn't meaningful, we can find other opportunities in life to do that. So let's see what the good doctor has to say from Doctor to the Soul. This is one of my favorite books. I'm sure this section on the meaning of work is so multi-highlighted. I've got yellow highlighter, pens, notes, all kinds of things. I love this chapter. So I'm going to pull a few of my highlights out. I'm sure I've talked about this before, but it's Labor Day. Let's talk about it one more time. He says, as long as creative values are at the forefront of the life task, their actualization generally coincides with a person's work. Just in reading that, you can see the difference between the interpretation of German into English, but also his writing style, so different than Fabry's. He writes, work usually represents the area in which the individual's uniqueness stands in relation to society and thus acquires meaning and value. Your job is what you contribute to the world. Now, it's only part of it, but it's a big part. 40, 50, 60 hours a week of how you contribute. And if you don't feel what you create at work is meaningful, then what you bring to that job, how you show up, what your attitude is, can definitely be meaningful. This meaning and value, however, is attached to the person's work as a contribution to society, not the actual occupation. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. I love that from Fabry. It's not how big your circle is, it's how you fill that circle. The work in itself does not make the person indispensable and irreplaceable. It only gives him the chance to be so. One of my favorite books by the author Seth Godin, Godin. It's called Linchpin. Are You Indispensable? And he talks about exactly that. A lot of beautiful case studies. I think the book's probably 15 or 20 years old now. Beautiful case studies of people that it wasn't about the job, it was how they did it and how they actually improved the job or the company or the situation to become truly indispensable. They used their uniqueness in a meaningful way to bring about amazing things for the places where they work. However, I think there's a contrary paragraph in here somewhere. There we go. This is the one. This maybe speaks to the idea that it's hard to find meaningful work today. People's natural relationship to their employment as the area for possible actualization of creative values and self fulfillment often is distorted by prevailing conditions of work. There are, for example, those who complain that they work 8 or more hours a day for an employer and for that employer's interest alone, doing nothing but adding interminable columns of figures or stand at an assembly line and perform the same movement, pulling the same lever on a machine. And the more that the job is reduced to impersonal and standardized movements, the more pleasing it is to the employer. And we're on the cusp of even more than that, right? So he talks there about automation and robots coming in and computers. And now with the growth of AI, we're facing even more potential change, more jobs being moved to automation, to AI. But there's a positive there, I think. As Fabry said, as we have more time to do things, less time for work, we have to find more meaning. And maybe that is going and getting a different education. That was a lot of the examples he had in the rest of his chapter. There was people that realized what they were doing wasn't fulfilling them. So going and getting some kind of different education to do that. I don't know. It's an interesting idea. I don't know if we do that as much today. We can. There are a lot of certifications and short education sessions to do that. You don't have to go back and get a 4-year degree. But I believe there's always opportunity for growth. There's always opportunity to learn. I was just telling my men's group yesterday, there's always an opportunity to challenge yourself. There's no reason that you shouldn't be finding ways to grow and develop. Frankl goes on. Let's see. Yeah, this is heartbreaking, right? The more the job is reduced to impersonal and standardized movements, and I've seen this. I've seen this in different factories I've helped. Right, the idea of I believe it's Six Sigma, and oh, there's another one too. I actually watched a supervisor uh, like tape areas of movement to make them to reduce waste of movement, waste of human action to fractions of a percentage. There's a field of study that actually wants to reduce what you do to this, well, standard movement and impersonal movement. It's more pleasing for the employer because they can try to get more out of the person. Now, I think we're at a time where maybe that doesn't happen as much. Where companies that realize, well, here's the trick: if they want to hold on to people, they have to treat them as humans. In my experience, some companies don't care about holding on to people. They just want to get to squeeze that impersonal, repetitive action out of you. And that's not always in a factory pulling a lever. Sometimes that's brain work too. Um, but I'm not going to comment on what jobs those are, just to get myself out of trouble. In such circumstances, it is true work can be conceived only as a mere means to an end, the end which is earning money. That is, earning the necessary means for a real life. In this case, real life begins only with the person's leisure time. And the meaning of that life consists in giving form to that leisure. To be sure, we must never forget that there are people whose work is of such exhausting quality that afterward they are good for nothing but falling into bed. I don't think we live in a time like that anymore, right? Anymore, but I don't know. Frankl obviously did. The only form that they give their leisure is to use it as a period of recovering their strength. They can do nothing more sensible than to sleep. And that obviously is a sad situation. And those are situations of obvious existential crisis that I try to help people out of. But I believe many of us live in a time where we have leisure time, but unfortunately, maybe we squander it doing the thumb workout on Twitter, InstaFace, whatever it might be. Um, I actually heard somebody talking about that just recently, how hours can disappear when that person was feeling low. Hours can disappear before they realize, oh my goodness, right? Those little dopamine bursts keep you going, and it's important to find, as Frankl says, ways to find meaning in leisure. In my men's group, it's a men's substance abuse group. So we talk about how a lot of men, when work seemed meaningless, would go home and drink or smoke or snort or pill pop or whatever it might have been. And pretty soon that became the only way to find meaning. And well, obviously that doesn't work either. So I would question you. What meaningful activities do you engage in your leisure? Are you getting outside? Are you exercising? Are you putting yourself in nature? Are you connecting with friends and family? Are you doing some kind of service project to help your community? These are all, as we read and as you know, meaningful opportunities, opportunities to discover meaning. The existential work. Let's see. There's this highlight here. It's kind of a negative one. It goes on to say that we all know the type of factory manager or financial magnate who is entirely devoted to earning money. Right? We all know those people that just want to work and continue to earn, but is so busy earning the means for living that he forgets life itself. The pursuit of wealth has become an end in itself. And I think sometimes we see that in society. We see people who spend their days adding to their wealth, but not doing anything with it. They forgot to live. And so today, on this Labor Day, that is my encouragement for you. Enjoy the day. If you're listening on Labor Day, enjoy some warm weather and some fun, some enjoyment. If you're listening after Labor Day, I hope you had a good time. I hope you rested and relaxed and did something meaningful. That's really the trick of life. That's living, finding ways to do it meaningfully, engaging in all of these things we talk about on the podcast. Sometimes work is a means to an end. Sometimes it is meaningful in itself, but it is up to you to choose your attitude and to make those decisions. I hope you do. And if you're struggling with it, hey, you know how to contact me. I'm happy to help. So before I sign off, some really cool news right before I'm recording at a different time of day than I usually do. So if you hear it in my voice, or I don't know how I say things, it's because, yeah, well, it's later in the day. Because I got to sign up for my practicum experiences for the psychedelic assisted therapy course I'm going through. So I can't wait. I will be experiencing two different therapeutic journeys, one in November and one in February. While I am still in class, I am putting together the means for therapeutic retreats. Right now, my physical location makes it hard to do this kind of work in my current office. Maybe I'm looking for a new office on a consistent basis. But these forms of treatment work very well in a group retreat kind of format. So right now, While I prepare for my ketamine therapy experience, I am putting together plans for a retreat somewhere in northern Indiana the spring of 2025. It'll be a weekend retreat with, of course, a preparation phase, a ketamine experience, and then an integration session, a group integration session where we talk about what happened and how that impacted you and what that can do for you. And then, of course, there's subsequent follow up as well. So I will be having that experience here in November of this year. And then I am working with a few nurse practitioners who will do the medical component, the medical assessment, and I'll be doing the therapy. So something I'm very excited about. There will be about, at the end of my cohort, approximately 2,000 of us nationwide. We're continuing to train more therapists to engage in these indigenous medicines and entheogens. Um, but it's just very exciting to think about what might be, how we might improve mental health in this mental health crisis in a way that big pharma has not thought of. So keep listening. I have more to share on that. Again, I'll be having my experiences, and I certainly want to share um, these amazing, I would say new forms of therapy, but they're not new. We've been using them for thousands of years. We're just able to get back to using them. So stick around, subscribe to the newsletter at danielafrans.com. Keep listening to the podcast, and I will definitely have more to share. So, as always, thank you for this opportunity to bring a little bit of mental health and meaning to your day. Take care.